Yeah, so my name is Tolley. I am a disability advocate who's worked on an international basis across many sectors. Um, it's always really difficult when someone says, "What do you do?" And I'm like, I don't really know. My work centres mostly around centralising the voice of children and young people. But on top of that, I do a little bit of disability in the arts representation, hence why I think we're trying now. Um, yeah, so that's me really.
Sounds awesome. So the first question I always ask guests is, when was the first time you've experienced discrimination or saw discrimination?
That's a really difficult question because I mean it might just be me and I always say this, like this is just my opinion and I can only speak from my experience and there's 25% of the world's population who identifies as having a disability. Like as an advocate, I can't speak for everyone, but I would say that I don't really know the answer to that question because I think to a certain extent ableism is so ingrained in society, and yes, we're a million miles away from where we were, but we've also got a million miles to go. So I don't know, and I'm one of these people that just really isn't easily offended. So the chances are I will have experienced it and laughed in its face and carried on, So I feel like that doesn't really answer your question.
No, it's okay, it's fine. It's not, it's a question that seems to stumble a lot of people.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those, isn't it? You mentioned a lot about ableism sort of being ingrained in our society, and I have to agree with you there. What does that look like, do you think, in the arts?
Lack of representation. Um, and also and again, I'm now 30, and it wasn't until I was sort of 25-ish that I really got into the disability sector and started advocating for myself. And I think many of the reasons behind kind of that almost delayed start in my career, is because I don't believe that we should be, as disabled people, I don't believe that we should be shouting about our rights to non-disabled people and expecting them to immediately understand. Like, you don't know what you don't know. And a lot of people, once you start a conversation and then start that dialogue and start to kind of change, in turn, eventually change the trajectory for disabled people, many people are really like accommodating. So in terms of the arts, I think a lot of the lack of representation just comes from a lack of knowledge from the people, not necessarily the artists, because obviously, if you've got a disability and you're in the arts, that's well done because you've managed to get into a space that is really difficult to get into. But from like a non-disabled perspective, and I would say this is stretches across the board and isn't just in the arts. Like a lot of people are quite fearful of getting it wrong, and they don't want to put their foot in it, and they don't want to say the wrong thing because actually they don't want to offend, or they just don't have enough knowledge to even begin that conversation. And I'm not saying it's specifically down to people with disabilities to start that conversation because it's not our responsibility to tell the world essentially what's wrong with us and how they can put it right. But if we're not going to, who is? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and again, like you'll find this as we go through. I've totally lost what your question was, but I think the lack of representation just comes from a lack of conversation and a lack of knowing how to even begin that conversation.
And I think that's the case for a lot of demographics. I think a lot of
Yeah,
like a lot of white people are scared to talk about race. A lot
yeah,
of straight people are scared to talk about LGBTQ issues.
yeah. And actually, you raise a really good point there, is that, disability isn't monolith. Like we are not, yes, we have disabilities, and you know, whether that comes, whether you subscribe to the social model or not, you know, we have some level of impairment, but it's not the only thing. Like I am more than my disability, I am more than my impairment. So in terms of that intersectionality, how do we begin to talk about disability in relation to LGBTQ, in relation to race, in relation to all the other minorities? And what does that look like in terms of representation within the arts or just generally within the world?
Yeah, totally. I think it's a really tough one. I think it's a really difficult one to sort of ascertain what that looks
Okay.
like. And I suppose people have lived experience of the I know what you mean, sort of it's difficult because as someone with lived experience, you don't want to be the one educating people constantly.
No, I mean, myself and a friend who is also uses a wheelchair. We were like a philosophical conference the other week at the university that I work at, and there was, as with all things, there was photographers there, and they were snapping away and doing what they do, and afterwards he said that they were specifically taking photos of us as the two most apparently disabled people in the room. And I was like, well, yes, that may be true, and actually it probably is, but like in order to show diversity and in order to show progression, you have to show diversity and progression. You can't just be in a room and expect no one to take a photo, because actually, it wasn't that long ago that we wouldn't have even been invited to the room. So I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely an interesting one. So what's your experience with like live music then? Are you a music lover?
I'm a music lover, but I'm more of a arts lover. So I think, because one of your questions is when did I experience live music for the first time, and I think that must have been like probably about 10. Um, but again, in fact, I'm pretty sure it was like some kind of S Club 7 concert, if I'm totally honest. Um, did I notice that there were barriers? Probably not. Like, probably, um, I was just happy to get the front row seat because, if you've got disability, sometimes it's a perk of the job to get those front row seats.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. My first one was Avril Lavigne, so
Oh,
completely
do
relatable.
you know what? Yeah, I think we must be of a similar age then, because
Yeah.
Avril was very much the soundtrack to my childhood after
Uh,
S Club 7, clearly. I must have been a bit younger, actually. I think I must have been about 6.
mm,
Um, yeah.
no, cool. I think I'm 31 tomorrow, so
Yeah, so I'm,
very was.
firstly, happy birthday for tomorrow, and
Thank you.
secondly, yeah, we are about the same age. I'm 31 in November.
Yeah,
So
brilliant. So, in terms of sort of the arts, music specifically, but also arts generally, because I think it applies to both, whose responsibility do you think it is for to enable accessibility? Do you think it's the artist, or do you think it's promoters, or who do you think?
it's everybody's, isn't it? Like, obviously, I've said I work in a university. Send is everybody's business. Disability is everybody's business. Accessibility, inclusion is everybody's business, and you can't just do inclusion once. You have to keep doing inclusion because it's so progressive. Um, again, who starts that conversation? Because yes, it's everybody's responsibility, but how are people supposed to know that it's their responsibility? And yes, you can have a responsibility, but unless you know how to do it, unless you know, I mean, everybody with a disability is different because everybody, like disabled or not, is different. So for me, I have cerebral palsy, I use wheelchair. That's quite an apparent disability. And it's okay, yes, putting a ramp into venues to make sure that people who use wheelchairs can get in the building. But if you've got a non-apparent disability and you're, what does access look like then? Because then from a non-disabled perspective, the solution to access isn't as obvious because you don't look, and I hate that term, but you don't look disabled. So what does that look like? Um, it's a really difficult question. I honestly don't think I'm giving you like very concrete answers, but I don't think there are any.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I feel like the questions are kind of more prompts than they are
Yeah,
necessarily like straight up questions. I think it'd be a boring conversation if it were just like one answer questions, to be fair.
yeah. I mean, I with a friend, I created like a toolkit for Contemporary Visual Arts Network East Midlands. And that was very much along the lines of, we asked people who identified as having disabilities why they didn't go to certain venues. And a lot of it was around just generally, how do I get there? You know, what's the transportation route? When I get there, how do I access the building? What questions do I need to ask to make sure that I get what I need into to enjoy the experience? A lot of it actually, and this is probably more to the point, is I don't feel like I fit in to those kind of spaces. And I don't know whether you've experienced the same in like live music, but I don't feel like I fit in. I feel out of place. I feel judged. I feel, I don't feel represented in the art. And actually from an artist perspective, and again, I speak only from what I know. I'm not an artist. Um, how difficult is it to get into a practice because one, it's not accessible, and two, you don't feel like you're represented, you don't feel like you belong.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, in terms of my own sort of experiences, like I have access needs, but they're not visible access needs. So it's a bit difficult to really quantify what they look like.
Yeah.
And I know what you mean about not really fitting into the space. I feel like I fit in live music until I don't, if that makes sense.
And again, you don't have to answer this, and it's your podcast, so I shouldn't really be asking questions. But do you find it difficult, or like, is it a difficult conversation to have to start that conversation around these are my access needs and this is what you need to do?
Yeah, 100%, because they're not visible for me.
Yeah,
So it is, and it's hard to explain like why I might need some space away, or like why I might need to go in the queue first or before someone else. That's difficult to explain for some
yeah,
people. But it's difficult because on the one hand, I feel like it is what it is. But
yeah.
on the other hand, I also feel like evidently with this podcast, I feel like it shouldn't be that way. And I wish things would change.
Yeah, and I think I use that term like all the time. It is what it is, because I think, and again, my experience, yours might be different, but we are so used to, as people with disabilities, disabled people, people with impairments, whatever the term is you want to use, we're so used to just making it work, because there's
Yeah.
almost a sense of like, there's almost a sense, and I don't know whether anyone else experiences this, or whether again, it's just so ingrained in society. There's almost a sense of gratitude to even be invited into the room, like, because not again, like I said not that long ago, we weren't. It wasn't even a conversation. So, but then you're absolutely right. It shouldn't be, and as long as we keep having these conversations, you know, just keep chipping away at what it should be like, then we're on the right path.
Yeah, I think so as well. Um, I suppose like what should the narrative be in terms of accessibility, specifically in the arts?
I think if you make spaces accessible for disabled people, you make it space is accessible for everybody, right? Like universal design is so like poignant and paramount to this conversation. So and this is I don't really want to say this in the way that I'm gonna say it, but there we go. Um I think it's just common sense. Like, common sense dictates that accessibility should be easy, right? And that spaces that are accessible, for me at least, should be calming, welcoming. Like, it shouldn't be stressful just leaving the house, right?
Mm.
Um, but as I say that, you don't know what you don't know, and for because let's face it, a lot of design comes from non-disabled people, and a lot of kind of the logistics around how events work
Mm.
come from non-disabled people, and if you've never experienced what it's like to have low vision or be visually impaired, how are you supposed to know that actually what would be really helpful is larger signage?
Mm.
Um, because, and I think again, if most people can understand to a certain extent what it's like to break a leg, right?
Mhm.
So most people therefore think about physical accessibility first, but it's so much more than that.
Yeah. I'd argue it's an attitude more than
Yeah,
it is necessarily a narrative, I suppose. Like,
it is, but then and you know, and I'm not putting all the onus here on people with disabilities because it's not our job, and it's two-way street, right? If we want accessibility, there needs to be some acceptance from those who are non-disabled, and not just acceptance, like understanding and willingness to learn. Um, Society needs to be more accessible
mm,
because when that happens, disabilities aren't so disabling.
mm. Yeah. You mentioned something earlier about, which I thought was interesting, about disability not being monolithic. And I suppose in terms of like, it is a challenging thing, isn't it? So for example, if you're deaf or hard of hearing, having visual, like very visual aids, like very bright lights might be helpful to indicate something, but for an autistic person, that might be really stressful for them.
Yeah.
So it's challenging, isn't it, I suppose, to get something that's going to be accessible for everybody.
And do you know what? That's never going to happen.
Yeah.
You're never going to get one space that is accessible for everybody because even within, okay, so I've got cerebral palsy, which is possibly the most common disability to have, arguably. I don't have the stats to prove that, by the way. But I have friends that have CP. Do we have the same access needs? No. So then when you start thinking across, like you said, communities, so people from the deaf community and then people from the new diverse autistic community, how again to reiterate your question, how is something supposed to be accessible for everybody? And how do we navigate the fact that it just isn't? Like you just can't achieve that.
I wonder whether that's maybe a reason as to why a lot of sort of architects and creators and that kind of thing who are not disabled, perhaps there's an element of like feeling like they can't win, so they don't bother, which I mean, I don't think that's the right attitude to have
No.
personally.
And you know what? If you get it blindly wrong, pardon the pun, you know, but if you do get it wrong, then at least you tried, right? At least at least you've given it a go. I've been I'm not sure where you're based, sorry.
I'm in East Midlands.
Okay, yeah, so meet you. So I've been to a venue not too far from where I live. And they were given a grant, quite a sizable grant, to make their venue more accessible. And so I went along and thought, oh, great, I can finally go and see that show that I've wanted to see or be in the space. And as I say, if they've given it a go, that's great. But what they've done, so for instance, the supposedly accessible toilet was tiny. Um, they had put a hoist in, but not put a changing bed in. So, like, where are you supposed to go once you're hoisted out of your chair? The only option is to like dangle midair, right? Um, they had the bar was accessible, but there were steps down to the bar. So I think there's a line between as long as you've given it a go, and as long as you're willing to listen to disabled people in a non-tokenistic way, great. But also back to that common sense, you know,
Yeah.
if you're gonna do something, you need to do the whole of something and not just because that just makes the space even more inaccessible if you've only got half accessibility.
Yeah, it's almost like they're giving up, to be honest.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
ridiculous. Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, I feel like it's it's a tricky one, but it's also like you're right, it's common sense. It should be common sense.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's much excuse for it, to be honest, sometimes.
No, and I think, do you know what, like EDI and equality and disability is more in the public realm now than it ever has been. And so you are right that everyone will know someone that has a disability. Right? It's 1 in 8, I think. And so there really isn't an excuse. And there's you don't know what you don't know, but also everyone should know a little bit of something at this
Yeah,
point, I think.
I think so too. I do wonder whether there's an element of, well, I'll tell you what I feel around disability generally in public perception in the media with our governments. I feel that EDI, I think sometimes it can be quite tokenistic, and I feel that disabled people tend to only ever get brought up when it comes to benefits and
Yeah,
cutting benefits. There don't seem to be much of a narrative around disabled people, or the Paralympics or something.
yeah,
There doesn't seem to be a lot of narrative around disabled people sort of being empowered or like getting on with their lives. There's a lot of narrative that's very negative, I think. And I think that needs to change. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
yeah. I mean, I think you're absolutely right, and I think, I think about my day-to-day life, and I work. And I'm not saying that all disabled people can or will want to work, but I do work. And when I tell people I work, the response is, "Oh wow, like that's really good, like well done." And I'm like, okay, I'm kind of just doing the same as you. Um, and there is still that there's the negativity, that there's the negative um perceptions around disability. There's the kind of the charity around disability. Or there's the inspiration porn around disability. Like you're an inspiration because you managed to get up this morning and you made it out the door, and it's like, yeah, no, that that isn't how it is, and it shouldn't be how it's perceived. And whilst I do think we are getting there, because if we weren't, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I just Sometimes I just don't know where to start with it. Like the problem is so big around disability and perception that you kind of go, like, this is never ending. But it's not, because we've got we've got to where we've got to so far.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's an ongoing thing, isn't it? I
Yeah.
suppose it's like an ongoing process. So you mentioned previously around not being many role models in the arts for disabled people. Do you have any sort of particular musicians or artists or actors or whoever that you find are like, I hate the word inspirational, so I'm not going to use the word inspirational, but like who are disabled and use their lived experiences to inform their sort of work?
Um, Not necessarily artists, although I had the pleasure of working with Jason Hilsham in November of last year, and I don't know whether you've ever seen any of his work or,
I haven't, no, I need to check that out.
but yeah, he creates like big inflatable pieces of art. Jason the Argonauts is his like most famous, and he works internationally. And I just think, and he was so gracious. He gave up a lot of his time to come and run a workshop with us, and but I get my inspiration, again, I hate the word, but I get my drive from the people that I work with, the communities that I work with, the young people that I get to at the moment interview, and that they share their experiences. And I just think, do you know what? This is why we're all here. This is why we're having this conversation, because you know we need to make it better for future generations, and we need to make sure that they're represented, and that they're heard, and they're valued, and they understand that, and that actually they don't walk into a venue, arts, or they don't walk down the street and think, I don't belong here, like there's something wrong with me.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It shouldn't be that way. And I think as well, like, although there's a lot to work on, like I think as you said before, we've come a long way in many respects. And there's always like quite a lot of hope, I think, in that respect.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, we've still got to keep working, I guess. Yeah. I'm conscious of your time. So do you have any go-to songs or albums to pick you up?
So I'm a fan of Pink. Um so and I love Evanescence. I'm trying to think like specific songs. Um Walk Me Home.
Amazing.
Yeah, just to be fair, just anything that is uplifting. And I know I've said that and gone, but I really like Evanescence. So it's kind of the two don't go together. But yeah,
Evanescence are great. I used to love their first album. I used to listen to that all the time.
yeah,
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much. We really
no
appreciate it.
worries. Thank you.
Cheers.